Thank you all for coming out tonight, and welcome to Sugarlift. My name is Wright Harvey. I'm the founder of Sugarlift. I'm honored to introduce our esteemed speakers tonight, and to welcome you all to celebrate Valeri's solo show, Hidden in Plain Sight. Valerie asked me to come up here to kill some time because she hates to talk.
Everyone who knows me knows that.
Exactly. And before I introduce the speakers, if it's okay, I want to talk about your paintings a little bit.
Sure, talk away.
So there's a lot to see here, and I always like to abstract the idea of, what makes a good painting? Why are we here celebrating Valerie as an artist, the painting she's created? And to me, it's never just about the image. It's much more about, painting's about just transferring an idea, an emotion, personal experience, a universal experience. And I think the best art, like Valerie, is it helps us see the world a little bit differently. But for Valerie's paintings, for me, it's not just about seeing the city differently. They're not even necessarily about landscapes. I actually see her work more about, it's a portrait of humanity. It's about us. It's a portrait of the people who make up these settings, despite the people not being there. And the more I thought about this show, the more I thought about how the best work also can communicate those ideas using the least amount of information possible, the masterstroke in a sense. And it made me think about, I have a random abstract mind, so I think about random things. Your work made me think about the Voyager spacecraft. Launched in 1977 before I was born, and on that spacecraft, which is the first to go outside of our solar system, humanity decided to put some information on board of it so that this message in a bottle that goes out into the universe would someday be intercepted and be able to tell people who we were as humanity. And on this record, there were the obvious things. There were pictures of us. There was demonstration that we knew something about mathematics and physics. But to me, the most interesting information was what wasn't there, or what wasn't necessarily pictured. There were recordings of ambient sounds. There were recordings of the ocean waves, of birds chirping, of children laughing. There was blues music. There were Peruvian wedding songs. There was all this ambient context of what humanity was, because there was no person on that spaceship to tell the aliens who we really are. And when I look at Valerie's paintings, they're not cityscapes, they're not landscapes, they're all about the negative space of the people who aren't there, the people who collectively built these spaces, who had to interact in complex ways to figure out which bridge goes under the other bridge, and which sign am I putting next to the other sign, how we communicate with each other through signage and through graffiti. The humor there, I would hope that maybe you could talk to Elon Musk, but the next rocket that goes up should carry one of Valerie's paintings, because there's so much humanity in them. So that's what I love about your paintings. That's what I love about painting in general. That's what we're here to talk about tonight. We have two very interesting speakers. On my left is our moderator, Sean Corcoran, who's a curator at the Museum of the City of New York. I got to know Sean way back when he put on a show called The City is Canvas.
Oh, love that show.
What was it, 7 or 8 years ago, which is still traveling. Sean is also known for his Stanley Kubrick photographs through a different lens, In the Dugout with Jackie Robinson, and his current exhibition, New York, New Music, that we should all go out to see. Valerie needs no introduction. Valerie studied at the Art Students League. She lives in New Rochelle and paints prolifically in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, primarily in the Bronx in the shows. She's been exhibited everywhere you can think of. Museum shows at the Bronx Museum, Susquehanna Art Museum, Fleming Museum, the list goes on. When we put together her catalog, she said, if you have the CV as long as mine, you got to print the whole thing in the catalog. So if you want to know the rest of it, catalogs are available in the back for $20 cash. With that, thank you all again for coming, and I'll hand it over to Sean.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Sean. How are you?
I think, there was such a good introduction and kind of discussion about the work. I think I would want to start asking you about process and then just get you going and talking about the work.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask my first leading question, which is, how long does it take you to make one of these paintings?
These big paintings, where do I stand? I'm not good at the chair. I stand when I paint. I'm just used to standing.
Yeah.
So these big paintings take 2 to 3 months to do. It depends on what's happening. Some of them take the full 3 months. Some only take about 2, but I'd say 2.5 months is about the average. There was one painting I did that had these deteriorating batting cage nets that actually took 4 months. I work on one painting in the afternoon and in the morning because the light changes so much. So after about 3 hours or so, I'm just making it anyway. So I usually take a break and then I eat some lunch or something and then I work on the second one. And I paint outside pretty much from March until December. In the winter, because everybody wants to know this, so I'll just answer it. Everybody says, what do you do in the winter? I do 2 things in the winter. One of the things I do in the winter is I paint small paintings in my car. Some of those mini billboards, the ones that don't have any, greenery in them, those were painted in my car. I either tape the canvas to the steering wheel and use that as, or I have a small shutter box, which I can put on my lap and use that too. I have 2 things. The other thing I do is for all my major paintings, and you were going to ask me this too, I do a color study. Here's the color study for the painting over here. You can come and take a look at later. Now you're saying, wow, why would you paint that painting twice? Well, here's the deal. When I do the color study, it's very loose. It's not all detailed like this. And then in the winter, what I do when I have spare time is I go back into the study and I put all the details in, and I use the large version as my reference material. So I call my studies finished studies. Plus, because the large paintings take me so long, and I have a little bit of a limited time spare, there's a couple of months where I can't really paint without freezing, and that's not me. So it's good for me to have some other things to do. Besides the car paintings, I like to have finished studies. And sometimes somebody doesn't have room for a giant painting, but they might like to have the small version. Next.
Okay, so it takes you a long time,
Yes.
several months to make a painting.
Yes.
So when you decide, the decision is a serious decision on what
Sure.
the subject is going to be. You're going to be spending a lot of time with it. How are you deciding to paint these locations?
That's a very good question. I spend a lot of time driving and walking around. When I see something that grabs my eye, I will go back and look at it multiple times. Different lighting situations. It could take, from the time something catches my eye to the time it gets on the canvas, could be years. Sometimes something just isn't right, and then one day, the light is right, my brain is right, who knows what's right, and bingo, that's the time to paint. I do take little sketches with a rollerball pen, ink in a sketchbook. They're terrible sketches. I am not a good, drawing person. That's not my thing. I want to get right into the paint. But I take these quick sketches to sort of get the idea solidified for the composition. And then because the big paintings take so long, then I do a quick color study, and then I stretch the canvas. Because what I don't want to do is get on site and say, oh my God, this painting would have been so much better if I had another 2 inches of this composition. So doing the color study, even though they're very loose at first, gets me to a point where I can say, okay, I've got this thing in my head. I know what I want to do. Having said that, if something changes and I think it's better, I'm going to incorporate it. But the basic composition will be there.
I know that we've kind of talked a little bit about, you know, the locations and why you're painting so much in the Bronx, and that it's proximity because you're out there painting. It's got to be somewhat close to where you live. You could be choosing, let's say, much more, I don't know, for lack of a better word, commercialness. Oh, I recognize this place, and this is iconic New York. This is the myth of the city, and you're not doing that. You're
I love the beaten track.
Yeah, you know, these are more liminal places. They're places that, you know, I would suspect most of these places do not quite look like. Yeah.
Well, that is true. Most of what I paint could also be called going, gone. A lot of the places that I paint no longer exist or have radically changed. The other thing is, I feel like there's enough people who want to paint I don't know, you name it, the Statue of Liberty, the Eiffel Tower, any big thing. The world does not need me to do that. The world also never needed me to paint barns. You know, there's enough people. And my interests are really these places where most people kind of walk by, and I see the beauty in them. During the pandemic, when it started, I started walking a lot. It just got me out of the house, cleared my head, and this place is a place I might never have seen, and it's right around the corner from where I live. But I started doing this big loop, and I walked past it a bunch of times, and then one day the light is right, and the color is right, and I kept looking at it, and I'm like, okay, I gotta paint that. Matter of fact, I might do another version of it, but it would look too good too. But so that's one thing. The other thing that I spent a lot of time at this last year, from March until almost late November, was the High Bridge area. Most people are familiar with the view from the highway or, you know, the pedestrian walkway, which I'm not going to set up on a pedestrian walkway. How would I even get my stuff up there? You can't even park up there. But what a lot of people don't know is there's this weird part underneath. Always exploring. Exploring is probably the thing I love to do the most. And so I found this road that hardly anybody goes on. Here is the road. You can see it's kind of cracked and stuff. And I just drove down there one time. And I'm like, wow, look at this magical place. And it's on the edge of Bridge Park. There's all these bridges all along the river in the Bronx. And I wanted to paint there for years. I always have a dog. I love dogs. I have a dog now, Tula, rescue. And I couldn't go paint at this place because I couldn't leave her alone all day, weekends. But then my husband, during the pandemic, had to work from home. There's my great husband back there. And all of a sudden, it's take your dog to work day every day, and I'm not worried about the dog. So I got to spend this extended period from March until November, early March, until November, painting at this place where hardly anybody goes. Me and the locals, I got to know the sanitation workers, I got to know the people who, you know, just pass through. Anyway, so it was really interesting. And then one day, while I was working on this one, and I was warned, but somehow I thought it wouldn't happen, they put these giant stone barriers up. I couldn't get back to my site. But was I not finished my page? No. I parked quite a bit away at the beginning of where the barrier was. My husband had brought home this old shopping cart. By the way, that's the same place. If you look at the left, there's a little bit of a high bridge in that, those highways with the porky truck. Yes, I did the porky truck from a photo. It didn't stay still long enough. 95% of it is done on location, but if I need a photo, I'll use it. I have nothing against doing the photo. Anyway, so I wanted to paint that, but I'm like, I'm not carrying the big canvas. And then one day they opened the barriers again. Uh-oh. I went and ordered stretcher bars. I did a color study. I stretched the canvas. 3 days after I started painting, they put the barriers back up. And there I was with the shopping cart and the big canvas. But I got it done.
Well, speaking of photo reference I mean, well, one, you guys probably heard her reference your dog Tula.
Tula.
Just look around and you'll see
Tula
her
tag.
presence in some of the paintings. But so photo reference. I did an exhibition on graffiti, and so I am certainly interested in.
You're an authority. I love that show you did. It was a phenomenal show. He's very much phenomenal.
One thing I know for certain is that a lot of
I moved there right out of art school, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to paint now? And I'm like, well, I'll just go out to the industrial park. So I started painting industrial sites. That was the first thing right out of art school. Who knew? I actually went to art school. I thought I was going to be a figure painter, but nobody wanted to pose, and I liked working from life. I know that's how it's odd, but that's what happens. So I started painting what was around me, and a lot of the industrial sites had signage, like this thing, like the new and used parts and the radiators. So I was always interested in lettering. Bernard Bresky, my lettering teacher at Dupree School of the Arts, would have been very proud of me. I just took to it. I never thought I would. I remember the first time I took an assignment from him, I'm like, oh, I don't like this at all. And then the second assignment, I'm like, just focus. And then I fell in love with lettering. Who would have thought? So then I moved to the, New Rochelle. I'm in the Bronx in 8 minutes. And I still love lettering. I still love industrial sites. But now there's a lot more graffiti. Where I lived in New Jersey, in Jersey City, now it's changed. Now there's an explosion of graffiti. But, I've been living a long time, don't tell anybody that. Anyway, so when I started in the late 80s painting in Jersey City, there was hardly any graffiti. And so it just wasn't a thing. But I like lettering, I liked industrial sites. I like the way light hits form. I'm interested in color and sculptural qualities and the things that the places we build say about us as a society. And I also like the way nature and the built world collide, often in the fringes of our cities. I tend to be a city fringe person rather than, what's the big place anybody go downtown?
City centers.
City centers, yeah. And I'd be interrupted so much, I never did anything down there anyway. So it's sort of better for me to be along the fringes, just like the graffiti writers.
Yeah.
So as I was looking for these urban fringes that would appeal to me, whether they were waterfronts or industrial sites or anything like that, I started seeing a lot more graffiti in the Bronx. And I love color, and I'm like, that's cool, I'm going to paint that. And so it just kind of snuck in the back door. If I had never moved to New Rochelle, where I'm 8 minutes, I'm in the Bronx, I don't know that graffiti would have ever been that, it was hardly ever in any of my earlier paintings. So, and then what I also like sometimes is when I have commercial signage with the graffiti and the whole thing.
Yeah, the juxtaposition.
The juxtapositions. So can you ask me?
What?
Ruby.
Oh yeah. So is there any? Do you have any relationship with any of the?
Okay, I just got to talk about Ruby 87. This up here is a very beautiful Ruby 87. Ruby 87 is my tag. I only use it in my paintings, never on walls. I am not a graffiti artist. No, it's true. Spray paint is not my medium. I wish it was. I admire. Let me make this perfectly clear in case anybody was wondering. I love graffiti. I think it's beautiful. When I'm in these fringe places, I think, look at that pop of color. What is that message? What is that person trying to say to me? I am so interested in the stories. A lot of times you can't read it, but sometimes you can. Sometimes they're really funny. So, Ruby 87, excuse me, that's a funny one too, but Ruby 87 is my tag, a graffiti artist who I met when I was out painting. I meet a lot of graffiti artists because we hang in the same places. So I meet a lot of graffiti artists. Anyway, this guy, Cher, is his other graffiti name, came up, we became friends, And he knew that Ruby 87 was my cat. He borrowed it. And during the pandemic, he left this note. It's around the corner from where I live, in New Rochelle. Just a little soul, dark gloom and cozy days, Ruby 87 2020. Now I knew that was meant for me. I'm like, I gotta paint that. So that's why I painted that. I could never do a spray paint mural like that beautiful Ruby 87. And Cher went to art school. He's not only a gorilla tagger, which is one of his favorite things to do, but he's a very talented artist and a really nice guy too. Anyway, and this one I just love. Curb your ego. I mean, the pandemic's hitting us. You know, I'm like, there's good advice anytime, especially now, you know. And then, you know, a little COVID. Oh, sorry, we're all sick of COVID. And if you look closely, and you'll see this in a lot of my paintings, why did I even come up with this tag, Ruby 87? Ruby was my black shepherd dog who went over the Rainbow Bridge many moons ago, and 87 is the number of the house where I was living when I rescued her. So Ruby 87, I just made it up. She was still alive when I made it up. And I loved her dearly, and I still miss her. I'll leave that there. I'm very attached to my dogs. But sometimes I just needed a pop of color. I just needed something. You know, what was there, I couldn't read it, I couldn't make it out, I don't know. I just felt like I needed something. So I made up my own tag. If you look at this painting here, the only tag in that entire thing, well, there's one in the back of the billboard, it says Ruby 87. It said use. Who's use? I don't know use. Oh no, I just thought Ruby 87 in red would look better than use in black. So I changed it. Anyway, if you look closely, you will often find Tula and my current red-nosed pit bull. And Tula's up here, along with Ruby 87. And so those are my two tags, and I use them when I need them.
Well, okay, so now we know that these look like they're the real world and what was there, but now you're kind of giving us hints that they're not. So
Valerie's reality.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about your kind of philosophy of making these pictures, because they're not photorealist in the most hardcore sense of the word.
Well, they're not photorealistic because I don't do them for photos unless for a few little things that don't stand still. If there's trucks on a highway or occasionally a human, you know I used a photo to do that. But most of it is done on site. I love being in the world around me. I consider myself a visual storyteller, and being out on the same place for weeks, months, sometimes I do a whole series and I'm at the same site for years. I get to know the people who live and work in these areas, and I hear their stories. And I find out so much about these places. And while that may not be obvious in the painting, to me it helps inform the work. It helps me know what's important and what's not. And I will certainly change things. Here's another thing I changed. You see this painting right here? The Holiday Motel, exit 13. And after you die, you will meet God. Well, I saw that motel for years. Another thing, I kept my eye on it. But one day I was there, and there was the dead tree. And all of a sudden, it became the place I wanted to paint. Because the dead tree mimicked the color. I love signage, remember? This old Holiday Motel sign, I loved it. And there was a different billboard there. Not interested. And I kept hoping it would change. It never did. And one day I'm painting out there. The guy who owns the motel, his name is Andrew, and his sidekick Sonny comes out. I'm telling you, straight out of the Sopranos Central casting. This guy was the biggest character, Andrew. And he comes out, and he asks me, what are you doing? And I tell him, and then he goes inside. As he's walking past, he points to the dead tree to Sonny, and I knew that tree wasn't going to be there. I took a photo to make sure I got that tree. Sure enough, they changed the tree the following week. Guess what? 2 weeks later, that one died too. Let's go back to the billboard. It was meant to be a dead tree. Anyway, and he was such a character. One day he comes out to me. This is no longer a Holiday Motel. He inherited the business from his father. At one time, I think it was a place that a lot of people would stop. They used to have a cafe. You know, it was a different time. Those times are gone. It's more like a no-tell motel. You know what I mean? Day rates. Anyway, the guy comes out to me, Andrew, one time, and says to me, if anybody bothers, and he did, he had this really rough way of talking, anybody bothers you to the office, I got a gun. And I'm like, okay, like that's gonna help me. All right. So you can see that this place is a little funny. So the billboard never changed. But I had seen that After You Die, You Will Meet God billboard in another part of the Bronx. So I'm like, I want to paint that billboard, and I'm putting it in this painting. So I did. I did that from a photo in my studio. And the truth is, after you die, you will meet God. Nobody knows for sure. And nobody's going to the Holiday Motel for a holiday, so the subtitle is Promises, Promises. So anyway, that's my story.
Can we see if anybody wants to ask any questions? Yeah, does anybody have?
Anybody have a question? Yes.
Do you ever feel unsafe outdoors when you're painting?
No. In a word, no. I am lucky to be blessed with a pretty fearless disposition. There are things that bother me in life. People who don't treat their animals well, that kind of thing. But I'm not afraid of anybody doing anything to me. I'm pretty tough. I have a secret weapon, my voice. When I yell, people are gonna hear me. And I have a little bit of maybe too much information, but my mother was mentally ill, so I grew up a little bit crazy, and I can channel my inner crazy when I have to. And when anybody gets in my face, I'm like, I am crazier than they do, and they walk away. As a matter of fact, I had one crazy guy. I mean, he was nuts. I started going, and I didn't curse at the guy. I knew he was nuts. I stepped on, but I kept elevating my voice, saying, "Leave me alone, sir. Go away, sir. Leave me alone, sir." I never cursed at him, but I kept raising my voice. Finally, the guy was like, "Oh, lady, calm down," and he walked away. About a couple of weeks later, he comes back. I go, "Here we go again." Comes up to me, smiles this semi-toothless grin, and goes, "Do you still love me?" And I said, "Of course I do." Never bothered me again. So yeah, I'm lucky. I can do what I can do because I feel like I can handle myself. Maybe I'm dumb. I don't know. Any other questions?
Anybody else?
Yeah, if you know Valerie, you know she's just getting warmed up. So feel free to stick around.
You can always just kind of
Feel free to stick around. She'll take you through every story has 100. Every painting is 100 stories too.
That is the truth.
But if everyone could just join me in thanking Sean and Valerie for.
I have a big thank you. Sean wrote the essay in the catalog. It's wonderful. My friend Vasco, who I just see is there. There's an interview. And the guy who designed it is great, but he's not here. And then the other people I absolutely love are Team Sugarlift, Wright, and Sylvie, and Hannah, and Sophie. This show would not exist without their dedication and somebody's darn good eye for installing artwork. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.